Let us begin in the trees. Not the trees as we know them today, standing at the edge of a park or lining a suburban street, but the trees of Africa, some 7 million years ago. These were not gentle places. The canopy was a world unto itself, a vertical landscape where survival meant grip and balance, where every branch was both pathway and precipice. Our earliest ancestors lived here, in these trees. They were not human, they were not quite ape. They existed in that strange middle space, that evolutionary threshold where one form of life begins to hint at another. Imagine their hands, those hands that could curl around a branch with the certainty of instinct. Long fingers, curved slightly, designed by millions of years of arboreal life. The thumb, already capable of opposition, could press against the other fingers, could hold. But something was changing. The climate of Africa was shifting, a process so slow that no single creature would have noticed it in a lifetime. The forests were retreating. Where there had been continuous canopy, there were now gaps. Spaces, open ground. And in these spaces, a different kind of selection pressure began to apply itself. Picture the moment, repeated across millennia, when an early hominin descended from a tree and looked across a savanna. The grass stretched away, golden in the late afternoon sun. There was food out there, perhaps. Safety, possibly. But the journey from one tree to another now required something new. It required walking upright. Bipedalism, the word sounds clinical, almost cold, but the reality was written into bone and muscle over countless generations. The spine, which in our ape cousins forms a gentle arc designed to distribute weight across 4 limbs, began to curve differently. An S shape emerged. One curve in the lower back, the lumbar region, pushing forward. Another in the chest, the thoracic spine, pulling back. This double curve, this sinuous line, created something remarkable. A vertical column that could balance a skull directly above it. The pelvis changed too. In quadrupedal apes, the pelvis is long and narrow, optimized for walking on all fours. But in our ancestors, it became shorter, broader, more bowl-shaped. This created a platform, a base of support for the organs that would now hang vertically rather than horizontally. The iliac blades flared outward. The birth canal shifted. The entire architecture of the lower body was redesigned. And the feet. Consider the feet. In an ape, the big toe diverges from the other toes like a thumb. It is a grasping organ, perfect for gripping branches. But in the hominin foot, the big toe moved into alignment. It became parallel with the others, creating a more stable base for standing. The arch developed, that curved spring that absorbs shock and stores energy with each step. The heel bone thickened, widened, became a proper foundation. We know these things because of fossils. Fragments of bone, preserved by chance, mineralized over millions of years. In 1974, in a place called Hadar in Ethiopia, a paleoanthropologist named Donald Johanson found a skeleton. She was small, this ancient woman, perhaps 3 feet 7 inches tall. Her bones were brown from the iron-rich soil, and she was old, impossibly old, 3.2 million years. They called her Lucy, after a Beatles song that played in the camp that night. Lucy, whose scientific name is Australopithecus afarensis. Her skeleton tells a story of transition. Her arms were still long, suggesting she spent time in trees. But her pelvis, her spine, her femur angled inward toward the knee, all of these spoke of bipedalism. She walked upright, this small being from the Pliocene. She walked across an ancient landscape that no longer exists. But why? This is the question that echoes through paleoanthropology. Why stand up? Walking on 2 legs is not obviously superior. It is slower than the quadrupedal gait of chimpanzees. It offers less stability. It places enormous strain on the spine and knees, problems we still carry today in our herniated discs and worn cartilage. The answers are multiple, layered, complex. No single explanation suffices. Perhaps standing upright allowed early hominins to see over tall grass, to spot predators or food from a greater distance. Perhaps it reduced the amount of body surface exposed to the midday sun, important for creatures beginning to spend more time in open savanna. Perhaps it freed the hands, allowed them to carry things, food or infants or tools. Or perhaps, and this is the more poetic interpretation, it was all of these things together, a constellation of pressures that made the upright posture advantageous enough, useful enough, that those who possessed it had slightly more offspring, and those offspring carried the genes for longer legs, for curved spines, for aligned big toes. Evolution is not a ladder. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand as we wade into these ancient waters. It is not a progression from worse to better, from simple to complex, from ape to human along a straight line. It is a branching tree, a bush of possibilities, and most branches end. Most species go extinct. We are walking along one small twig at the edge of this vast bush, looking back at the branches that led here. After Australopithecus came other forms. Australopithecus africanus, found in South Africa, similar to Lucy, but perhaps more varied in its environment. Australopithecus sediba, a later species that shows an intriguing mosaic of features, and the robust Australopithecines, the Paranthropus species, with their powerful jaws and enormous chewing muscles, adapted to processing tough plant material. These were not our ancestors, the robust forms. They were cousins, distant relations who took a different evolutionary path. They thrived for a time, these heavy-jawed vegetarians, and then they vanished from the fossil record, perhaps outcompeted, perhaps victims of environmental change. The details are lost to time. Around 2.5 million years ago, something new appears in the fossil record. The genus Homo. Home. Us. Or at least, the first beings that scientists have decided to classify as part of our genus, based on certain features of the skull and teeth and skeleton. Homo habilis, they called the first one, handy man. The name comes from the stone tools found alongside the fossils, simple flakes of rock, but tools nonetheless, evidence of a mind that could imagine transforming one thing into another. The brain was larger than Australopithecus, about 640 cubic centimeters compared to Lucy's 450. Not huge, not yet, but growing. The face was changing too. In Australopithecus, the face projects forward, the jaw is large, the teeth are substantial. But in Homo habilis, we see the beginning of a more vertical face, a reduction in the size of the teeth, a more delicate jaw. These changes suggest a shift in diet, perhaps. Less reliance on tough plant material, more consumption of meat or softer foods. And then came Homo erectus, upright man. This name is somewhat misleading because, as we have seen, earlier hominins also walked upright. But Homo erectus walked with a fully modern stride, a long-legged gait that could cover ground efficiently. They were taller than earlier hominins, some reaching heights of 5 feet 9 inches or more. Their brains were larger still, ranging from 600 to over 1,000 cubic centimeters. Their skulls had thick bones, a pronounced brow ridge above the eyes, a long, low shape, quite different from our own high-domed heads. Homo erectus appeared around 1.9 million years ago, and they persisted for over 1.5 million years. Think about that duration. 1.5 million years. Our own species, Homo sapiens, has existed for perhaps 300,000 years, and recorded history spans only about 5,000. Homo erectus was successful in a way we can barely comprehend, spreading from Africa across Asia, adapting to different environments, maintaining a stable form across immense stretches of time. They made tools more sophisticated than the simple flakes of Homo habilis. The Acheulean hand axe, a teardrop-shaped stone tool, flaked on both sides into a roughly symmetrical form, appears with Homo erectus. These axes were not merely functional. They show evidence of aesthetic sense, of a desire for symmetry that goes beyond pure utility. They are beautiful, some of them, in an austere way. And they used fire. This is perhaps the most significant innovation attributed to Homo erectus, though the evidence is debated, ambiguous in the early record. But by 500,000 years ago, there are clear signs of controlled fire use. Hearths, charred bone, burned stone. Fire transforms the night. It creates a circle of warmth and light in the darkness. It keeps predators at bay. It cooks food, breaking down tough fibers, killing parasites, releasing nutrients that would otherwise pass through the body unused. Cooked food allowed for smaller jaws, smaller teeth, a smaller gut. It freed up metabolic energy that could be diverted elsewhere. To the brain, perhaps. The human brain is expensive metabolically. It comprises about 2% of body weight, but consumes 20% of the body's energy. This is a remarkable allocation of resources. No other primate invests so heavily in neural tissue. The shift to cooked food may have made this investment possible, may have removed one of the constraints on brain expansion. But we are moving too quickly forward. Let us return to the body itself, to the physical form that evolution was crafting. The skeleton of Homo erectus shows adaptations for long-distance travel. The legs are proportioned like ours, long relative to the arms. The pelvis is narrow, optimized for efficient walking. The shoulders and thorax are structured in a way that allows for effective running, with a decoupled movement between upper and lower body. Humans are, somewhat surprisingly, excellent endurance runners. Not sprinters, we are far too slow for that. But over long distances, over hours of steady pursuit in the heat of the day, a human can outlast almost any other mammal. This is called persistence hunting, and it requires several physiological adaptations. The ability to shed heat through sweating, the biomechanics of a running gait, the mental capacity to track an animal over vast distances. The skin changed too, though soft tissue rarely fossilizes, and we must infer this from other evidence. Hair was lost over most of the body, retained only on the head, where it provides protection from the sun, and in a few other locations. Bare skin, combined with an abundance of sweat glands, creates an efficient cooling system. As sweat evaporates, it carries heat away from the body, allowing sustained exertion even in hot environments. But bare skin has a vulnerability. Without fur, it is exposed to ultraviolet radiation from the sun. The solution was melanin, a dark pigment that absorbs and dissipates UV rays. Early humans in Africa, under intense equatorial sun, would have had dark skin, a protective adaptation against radiation damage and folate depletion. As humans moved north into regions with less direct sunlight, this changed. Dark skin is an excellent UV shield, but it also blocks the UV radiation needed to synthesize vitamin D in the skin. In northern latitudes, where sunlight is less intense and winter days are short, individuals with lighter skin had an advantage. They could produce sufficient vitamin D despite the reduced sunlight. Over many generations, populations in Europe and Northern Asia developed lighter skin tones. This is why human skin color varies across populations. It is not a deep genetic difference, not a fundamental division. It is a relatively recent adaptation, a response to different levels of solar radiation, a calibration of melanin production to match the environment. The genes involved are few in number, the changes are superficial. And yet, tragically, these superficial variations have been used to justify vast cruelties, to construct false hierarchies, to divide people who are biologically nearly identical. But that is a later story, a cultural story. We are still in deep time, still tracing the shape of bones. After Homo erectus came a proliferation of forms. Homo heidelbergensis, named after the German city near where the first fossil was found. Homo naledi, a strange, small-brained species found in a deep cave system in South Africa. The Denisovans, known primarily from a few bones and teeth, and from their genetic legacy in modern populations. And the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, our closest relatives, our evolutionary siblings. They evolved in Europe and Western Asia, adapting to Ice Age conditions. Their bodies were stocky, compact, built to conserve heat. Their noses were large, perhaps an adaptation to warm and humidify cold air. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger. They made sophisticated tools, created symbolic objects, buried their dead with apparent ritual. For a long time, Neanderthals were portrayed as brutish, inferior, a dead end. This was prejudice, not science. The evidence shows they were capable, adaptive, successful in their environments for hundreds of thousands of years. They were simply different. Another way of being human, or near human. Another branch on the bush. When our species, Homo sapiens, emerged from Africa and spread across the world, we encountered these other humans. In the Middle East, in Europe, perhaps in Asia, we met and interacted with Neanderthals. And we interbred. The genetic evidence is clear. Non-African populations today carry Neanderthal DNA, typically 1 to 2% of the genome. We are not purely Homo sapiens. We are a mixture, a blend. This changes the story. It makes extinction less absolute, survival more ambiguous. The Neanderthals as a distinct population disappeared around 40,000 years ago, but they persist as genetic fragments in many of us, ancient alleles still influencing immune responses, skin color, hair texture, even susceptibility to certain diseases. The body we inhabit now, this modern human body, is the product of all these changes, all these adaptations, all these evolutionary experiments. Our spine curves just so, bearing the weight of an upright posture and paying the price in back pain. Our feet arch and flex, propelling us forward with each step. Our hands are free, capable of both power grip and precision grip, able to wield a hammer or thread a needle. We are tall apes who lost our fur. We are bipedal primates with expensive brains. We are the descendants of creatures who climbed down from trees and walked across a changing landscape, who learned to make tools and control fire, who spread from Africa to every corner of the earth. The story is written in our bones, in the curve of the skull, in the length of the femur, in the structure of the inner ear that helps us balance as we walk. And it continues. Evolution has not stopped. It never stops. As long as there is life, as long as there is variation and selection and time. We are not a finished product. We are a moment in an ongoing process, a current configuration that will, given enough time, change into something else. But that is beyond our scope tonight. For now, let us rest with this image. An ancient figure, standing upright for the first time, looking across a savanna toward a distant tree, taking a step and then another, walking into the future. There is something almost poetic about the fact that humans have never been content to stay in one place. Movement is woven into our species at a fundamental level. We are, at our core, wanderers. And this wandering began early, began with those first hominins who ventured out of the trees and across the African landscape. Africa is our cradle. This is not metaphor, but geography, paleontology, genetics. Every line of evidence points to the same conclusion. Humanity arose in Africa, and for millions of years, our evolution played out on that single continent. The Rift Valley, cutting through eastern Africa like a great wound in the earth, has yielded more hominin fossils than anywhere else on the planet. This is where the story begins. But it did not stay there. Homo erectus, as we have seen, was the first hominin to leave Africa in significant numbers. Around 1.9 million years ago, they began moving northward and eastward. Fossils have been found in Georgia at a site called Dmanisi, dating to 1.8 million years ago. In China, at Zhou once called Peking Man. In Indonesia, at sites on the island of Java, originally called Java Man. These early migrations were slow, measured in geological time rather than human lifespans. A group might move a few miles, perhaps following game or seeking water. Their children might move a few miles more. Over thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, this incremental movement carried Homo erectus across vast distances, from tropical Africa to temperate Asia, from coastlines to inland plateaus. What drove them? We can only speculate. Population pressure, perhaps, as groups grew too large for local resources. Climate change, the endless cycle of wet and dry periods that characterize the Pleistocene. Curiosity, maybe, that peculiarly human trait of wanting to see what lies beyond the horizon. Or perhaps no grand motivation at all, simply the accumulated effect of small decisions made by individuals whose names and thoughts are lost forever. Later hominin species also migrated. Homo heidelbergensis spread through Africa, Europe, and Western Asia. The ancestors of the Neanderthals moved into Europe, adapting to the cold conditions of the Ice Age. And then, much later, our own species, Homo sapiens, began its great dispersal. The timing of this dispersal is still debated, refined as new evidence emerges. The current consensus suggests that anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, arose in Africa somewhere between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago. For a long time, perhaps 150,000 years or more, they remained in Africa, evolving, developing, existing as small bands of hunter-gatherers in various parts of the continent. The first movements out of Africa seem to have occurred around 120,000 years ago into the Middle East, the Levant region. But this early migration may not have succeeded. Fossil evidence from this period is sparse, ambiguous. It is possible that these early pioneers died out, leaving no descendants, another branch that ended. The major dispersal, the one that led to the peopling of the entire world, began around 70 to 60,000 years ago. This is the migration that matters, genealogically speaking. Genetic studies suggest that all non-African populations today descend from this relatively small group of migrants, perhaps only a few thousand individuals, who left Africa and moved into Asia. They traveled along coastlines, most likely. The sea provides resources, shellfish and fish, a reliable source of protein. The coast provides a path, a linear route that avoids the need to navigate complex inland terrain. By 60,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia. This requires sophisticated seafaring, even if the sea levels were lower and the distances shorter during glacial periods. They built boats or rafts, loaded them with supplies and people, and crossed open water to reach a continent they could not have known existed. In Australia, they encountered a landscape unlike anything in Africa or Asia. Megafauna roamed the continent, enormous marsupials, giant flightless birds. The climate was arid in the interior, lush in the coastal regions. The Aboriginal Australians, the descendants of these first arrivals, developed deep and complex cultures, an understanding of the land that spans tens of thousands of years, a spiritual relationship with place that is encoded in song and story. Meanwhile, other groups moved north and west. By 45,000 years ago, humans were in Europe, encountering the Neanderthals who had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. The two species coexisted for perhaps 5 to 10,000 years, a brief overlap in evolutionary terms, but long enough for cultural exchange, for interbreeding, for the Neanderthal way of life to be slowly, inexorably replaced by the Homo sapiens way. Why did we succeed where the Neanderthals did not? This question has generated countless theories. Perhaps our population sizes were larger, giving us a demographic advantage. Perhaps our technology was more flexible, allowing us to adapt to changing conditions more quickly. Perhaps we had superior communication, more complex language, better social networks that allowed for innovation and information sharing across groups. Or perhaps it was simply chance. The late Pleistocene was a time of dramatic climate fluctuations, rapid shifts between cold and warm periods. The Neanderthals, already living in small populations at the edge of their range, may have been vulnerable to these changes in a way that we, with our larger interconnected populations, were not. The last Neanderthal populations clung to existence in southern Iberia and possibly other refuges until around 40,000 years ago, and then they were gone. What remained were their genes, carried in the genomes of modern humans, and their artifacts, stone tools and hearths and carved objects, evidence of a mind that was not so different from our own. The peopling of the Americas came later and by a different route. For most of the Pleistocene, the Americas were uninhabited by humans. The Bering Land Bridge, a wide expanse of tundra that connected Siberia to Alaska during periods of low sea level, was the gateway. But when it was exposed, the glaciers covering much of North America made passage south difficult or impossible. When the glaciers retreated enough to allow movement, sea levels rose and flooded the land bridge. The timing had to be just right. Current evidence suggests that humans first entered the Americas somewhere between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago, though the exact date is contentious. They traveled south, either along the coast or through an ice-free corridor between glaciers, and spread rapidly throughout both continents. By 13,000 years ago, humans had reached the southern tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. This rapid spread is astonishing. In just a few thousand years, humans colonized two vast continents, adapting to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, from high-altitude plateaus to coastal lowlands. The megafauna of the Americas, giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats and mammoths and mastodons, began to disappear shortly after human arrival. Whether humans hunted them to extinction, or whether climate change was primarily responsible, or whether it was a combination of both, remains debated. The Pacific Islands were among the last places on Earth to be reached by humans. These required true seafaring skill, the ability to navigate across thousands of miles of open ocean, using the stars and the swells and the flight patterns of birds. The Polynesians, beginning around 3,000 years ago, undertook voyages of exploration and settlement that rank among the greatest feats of navigation in human history. They reached Hawaii, Easter Island, New Zealand, tiny specks of land in an enormous ocean. On each island, they established communities, brought plants and animals, adapted to local conditions. They developed unique cultures, languages, art forms, all while maintaining connections across vast distances through continued voyaging and exchange. By the time of European exploration in the 15th and 16th centuries, humans had occupied every habitable continent, nearly every island, from the Arctic to the Antarctic periphery, from rainforest to desert. We had become a truly global species, and yet we remain divided into thousands of distinct cultures, each shaped by its particular environment and history. This capacity for movement, this restlessness, is not merely historical. It continues to shape us. Even today, humans are profoundly mobile. We travel for work, for education, for opportunity, survival. We migrate from rural areas to cities, from poor countries to rich ones, from war zones to places of safety. We are refugees and immigrants, expatriates and nomads, tourists and pilgrims. The modern world, with its airplanes and highways and shipping routes, has accelerated this movement to an unprecedented degree. You can travel from one side of the earth to the other in less than a day. Information moves even faster, instantaneously, collapsing distance into irrelevance. And yet the fundamental pattern remains the same. Humans moving across landscapes, carrying their genes and their cultures, mixing and changing and adapting. There is a melancholy to this, perhaps. Each migration is also a leaving behind, a loss of place and connection. The hunter-gatherers who left Africa 60,000 years ago could not have known they would never return, that their descendants would spread across the world and transform it beyond recognition. Every journey is an act of faith, a decision to exchange the known for the unknown. The first person to cross a mountain range or sail beyond sight of land did so without maps, without any guarantee of what lay beyond. They carried only their skills, their tools, their social bonds, and a willingness to continue moving even when the way was uncertain. This is, in some sense, the human condition. We are not trees rooted in one place. We are not migratory birds following fixed seasonal paths. We are something else, something more open-ended. We move because we can, because the world is large and varied, because there is always something beyond the next hill or across the next river. And in moving, we change. The environments we enter shape us, physically and culturally. The high-altitude populations of Tibet and the Andes have adaptations that allow them to thrive in low-oxygen conditions. The Inuit of the Arctic developed technologies and knowledge systems suited to one of the harshest environments on Earth. The peoples of the Amazon learned to navigate and manage a rainforest of staggering complexity. Each of these adaptations is a solution to a problem posed by a particular landscape. And yet, humans have never relied solely on biological adaptation. We are too slow at evolving, our generation time too long. Instead, we adapt culturally, inventing new tools and techniques, new forms of social organization, new ways of understanding and relating to our environment. Clothing is a cultural adaptation, one that allowed humans to survive in cold climates without evolving thick fur. Shelter, from simple windbreaks to elaborate houses, is another. Fire, controlled and carried, extended the habitable range northward and upward in altitude. Agriculture, developed independently in multiple locations around 10 to 12,000 years ago, allowed for much denser populations and fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with the landscape. Each innovation was itself a journey, a movement from one way of life to another. The first farmers were not simply hunter-gatherers who decided to plant seeds. They were people who made a radical break with the past, who committed to staying in one place, to working the land, to storing surplus and defending territory. This was a different kind of migration, not across space, but across modes of existence. And agriculture enabled further migrations. Farming populations, with their higher birth rates and larger group sizes, expanded outward, sometimes displacing hunter-gatherers, sometimes absorbing or coexisting with them. The Bantu expansion in Africa, the Austronesian expansion across the Pacific, the Indo-European migrations across Eurasia, all of these were driven or facilitated by agricultural societies on the move. Language spread with these migrations and diverged. The Indo-European language family, which includes English and Spanish and Hindi and Russian and Persian and many others, all descend from a common ancestral language spoken somewhere on the Eurasian steppes thousands of years ago. As speakers of this language moved and separated, their speech changed, branched, became mutually unintelligible. And yet the deep structural similarities remain, evidence of shared ancestry. The same is true of genes. Human populations today are not sharply divided into separate races. The genetic variation is continuous, clinal, a gradient rather than a set of discrete categories. Most genetic diversity exists within populations, not between them. An individual from one part of Africa may be more genetically similar to an individual from Europe than to another individual from a different part of Africa. This is because humans have never stopped mixing. Migrations are not one way. Trade routes, conquest, intermarriage, all of these have created a genetic web that connects all living humans. We are, quite literally, one family, one species, with local variations that reflect history and geography, but no fundamental divisions. And yet, we persist in dividing ourselves, in creating boundaries and borders, in defining insider and outsider. This too is part of our evolutionary heritage, perhaps. The ability to recognize kin, to form coalitions, to distinguish friend from foe. These were adaptive in small-scale societies where everyone you met was either a relative or a stranger who might pose a threat. But in the modern world, this tendency becomes dangerous. The stranger is not a threat. The person from a different continent speaking a different language is not fundamentally different. We are all descendants of the same wanderers, all carriers of the same restless gene that drives us to explore and move and settle and move again. Perhaps this is the lesson of human migration, if there is a lesson. We belong everywhere and nowhere. We are at home in the world precisely because we have never been content to stay in one place. The earth is our habitat, all of it, from pole to pole. And the story of our species is the story of claiming that habitat, one footstep at a time, across deserts and mountains and oceans, across the entire surface of the planet. And now we stand at another threshold. Some speak of migrating beyond Earth, to the Moon or Mars or beyond. This would be migration of a different order, leaving not just a homeland, but a home world, venturing into environments where every breath must be manufactured, where the very chemistry of the soil is alien. Whether this happens, whether it is wise or foolish, is not for us to decide tonight. But the impulse, the desire to see what lies beyond, to go where no one has gone before, this is deeply human. It is the same impulse that sent Homo erectus out of Africa, that sent Polynesians across the Pacific, that sends people today across borders in search of better lives. We are wanderers. We have always been wanderers. And as long as there is a horizon, there will be someone walking toward it, carrying everything they own, hoping for something they cannot quite name, moving into the future one step at a time. Let us turn now to the hand, not as metaphor, but as anatomy, as evolutionary achievement. The human hand is an instrument of remarkable versatility, capable of both precision and power, able to manipulate objects with a delicacy that few other animals can match. Consider its structure: 27 bones, 17 muscles in the palm alone, plus another 18 in the forearm that control finger movement through tendons. The thumb, opposable, capable of touching each fingertip, creating a variety of grips. The fingertips, rich with nerve endings, sensitive enough to detect textures measured in microns. The entire mechanism evolved over millions of years, shaped by the demands of arboreal life and then repurposed for terrestrial tool use. The hand is not unique to humans. All primates have hands, grasping organs adapted for climbing and manipulating branches. But the human hand has certain features, certain refinements. The thumb is longer relative to the fingers than in other apes, which increases the range of opposition. The fingers are shorter, which provides better leverage for precision grip. The wrist is mobile but stable, allowing for fine adjustments in angle without sacrificing strength. These modifications, subtle as they may seem, have profound consequences. They make possible a range of manipulations that are difficult or impossible for other primates. Threading a needle, painting a picture, napping a stone to create a sharp edge. Tool use is not exclusive to humans. Many animals use tools. Chimpanzees use sticks to fish for termites, stones to crack nuts. Crows fashion hooks from wire to retrieve food. Sea otters use rocks to break open shells. But human tool use is different in degree and kind. We do not merely use objects we find, we modify them extensively, transforming one thing into another through sustained effort. The earliest stone tools appear in the archaeological record around 3.3 million years ago in Kenya. These are simple flakes, pieces of stone struck from larger cores. They are crude but effective, sharp enough to cut through hide and sinew, to process a carcass, to scrape wood. Someone made these tools, some early hominin, Australopithecus, or perhaps an early Homo, and the making required both intention and skill. To nap stone, to create a sharp flake, you must understand the material. Different kinds of rock fracture differently. Flint and obsidian and chert produce clean breaks with sharp edges. Limestone crumbles. The angle of the blow matters, the force, the point of impact. This is knowledge that must be learned, practiced, refined. And it must be remembered, passed down. A single individual discovering how to make a stone tool would accomplish nothing if that knowledge died with them. Tool use becomes significant when it is cultural, when techniques are taught and transmitted across generations, when innovations accumulate and spread through populations. The archaeological record shows this accumulation. The Oldowan industry, those early simple flakes, persists for over 1 million years with little change. But around 1.7 million years ago, a new technology appears, the Acheulean hand axe, associated with Homo erectus. These are larger, more symmetrical, flaked on both sides into a teardrop or almond shape. They require more skill to make, more foresight, a clearer mental image of the desired end product. The Acheulean tradition persisted for over 1 million years, spreading from Africa to Europe and Asia. The hand axes found in England are essentially identical to those found in India or Ethiopia, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of thousands of years. This suggests a deeply conservative tradition, a strong emphasis on learning and replicating the proper form. But around 300,000 years ago, tool technology begins to accelerate. The Levallois technique appears, a method of preparing a stone core so that a single flake of predetermined size and shape can be struck off. This requires planning several steps ahead, visualizing the sequence of actions needed to achieve the desired result. It is, in some sense, a mental tool as much as a physical one. With Homo sapiens comes an explosion of innovation. The Middle Stone Age in Africa and the Upper Paleolithic in Europe see the development of blade technology, producing long, thin flakes that maximize the amount of cutting edge per unit of stone. Composite tools appear, where multiple materials are combined, stone points hafted onto wooden spears with plant resin adhesives, bone needles for sewing, antler harpoons for fishing. Each of these technologies represents a cognitive leap, a new way of thinking about materials and possibilities. The composite tool requires not just skill, but imagination, the ability to see potential connections between disparate objects. A stone can be sharp, a stick can be long. Together, attached properly, they can pierce from a distance. This is abstract thought, the manipulation of mental categories. The hand makes the tool, but the tool also shapes the mind. There is a feedback loop here, a co-evolution of manual dexterity and cognitive capacity. The brain regions that control fine motor movement of the hand are adjacent to the brain regions involved in language, in Broca's area. Some researchers have suggested that tool use and language evolve together, both requiring the ability to break complex tasks into sequential steps, both involving the manipulation of symbolic elements according to rules. Whether this is true, whether the connection is that direct, is debated. But it is clear that tool-making is a cognitive activity. It requires attention, working memory, the ability to inhibit incorrect actions, the capacity to learn from observation and instruction. When an expert napper makes a hand axe, they are not simply hitting rocks together. They are executing a learned program, a sequence of precise actions, adjusting in real time based on feedback from the material. And they can teach this. Human teaching is distinctive in its explicitness. We demonstrate, we explain, we correct errors. We do not simply allow the young to observe and imitate, though that happens too. We actively scaffold their learning, breaking complex tasks into manageable pieces, providing practice, offering encouragement. This is culture in action, the transmission of information not through genes, but through learning. And it allows for cumulative culture, the ratchet effect, where innovations are preserved and built upon, rather than lost with each generation. A single individual could not invent agriculture or writing or metallurgy from scratch. These are the products of many minds across many generations, each contributing a small innovation, each building on what came before. The hand is the instrument, but it is guided by the mind, and the mind is shaped by culture. This triangle, hand and mind and culture, is what makes humans distinctive. Other animals have hands or paws or manipulative organs. Other animals have intelligence, but only humans have this particular combination, this tight integration of manual skill and cognitive capacity and cultural transmission. Consider the simple act of making a hafted spear, a stone point attached to a wooden shaft. First, you must find appropriate materials. A good stone for the point, a straight branch for the shaft, resin or pitch for adhesive, sinew or plant fiber for binding. Each material requires knowledge of where and when to find it, how to identify quality, how to collect without harm or waste. Then, the stone must be shaped. This takes hours, days if the stone is large or difficult. Flakes are struck off, the edges refined, the thickness controlled. Mistakes are common, and a single errant blow can ruin a piece you have worked on for hours. Patience is required, and a certain emotional regulation, the ability to persist despite frustration. The wooden shaft must be prepared, cut to length, stripped of bark, straightened if necessary, perhaps hardened in fire. The end is split or carved to receive the stone point. Resin is collected, heated until it becomes sticky and pliable. The point is seated in the shaft, the resin applied, the whole thing bound tightly and allowed to cool and harden. The result is an object more capable than any of its component parts. The stone provides sharpness and durability. The wood provides length and leverage. The combination creates a weapon that can pierce thick hide from a safe distance, that can be thrown or thrust with force. This is not just tool use, This is engineering, and it is everywhere in the human story. Every culture, every human society that has ever existed has created tools. The specific forms vary enormously, adapted to local materials and needs. The Inuit made tools from bone and ivory and stone in a treeless environment. The peoples of Polynesia carved adzes and fishhooks from basalt and shell. The inhabitants of the Amazon used wood and plant fibers and stone to create a material culture suited to the rainforest. But the underlying principle is always the same: the transformation of raw material into functional object, mediated by the hand and guided by the mind. We are, in a very literal sense, the species that makes. Homo faber, the man who makes, might be as appropriate a designation as Homo sapiens, the wise man. The tools we make extend our capabilities. A spear extends reach. A basket extends carrying capacity. A boat extends range, allowing us to cross water. Each tool is a prosthetic, an external addition that augments what the body can do alone. And as tools become more sophisticated, this augmentation becomes more profound. Writing is a tool that extends memory beyond the individual lifespan. Mathematics is a tool that extends computational ability beyond what the mind can hold. The computer, the telescope, the microscope, all of these are tools that extend perception and processing into domains inaccessible to the unaided human. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, moving too far forward in time. Let us return to the Paleolithic, to those early toolmakers sitting by a fire, knapping stone, binding spear points, creating the material culture that would allow them to survive and thrive. There is a meditation in this, a kind of presence. When you work with your hands, when you focus on the material in front of you, the world narrows to the task. The sound of the hammerstone striking the core, the feel of the flake detaching, the slight give and then the sharp snap, the satisfaction of a clean break, a good edge. This is embodied cognition, thinking through the hands. The mind and the hand are not separate. They are one system, integrated, each shaping the other. Modern humans, living in an age of machines and digital interfaces, have somewhat lost this connection. Most of us do not make the objects we use. We buy them, pre-manufactured, designed by specialists, produced in factories. There is efficiency in this, and convenience, but perhaps also a loss. When you make something with your hands, you understand it in a way that is impossible otherwise. You know its weaknesses, its possibilities, the care required in its creation. Some people still practice traditional crafts, still work with wood or stone or fiber, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to maintain that connection, to keep alive that ancient knowledge. They report a satisfaction in the work, a sense of completion that is different from intellectual or social achievements. There is something primal in creating a functional object from raw materials, in seeing the potential in a piece of wood or stone and bringing it forth through skill and patience. This is our heritage, every one of us. We are all descendants of people who made things, who shaped their world with their hands. The tools have changed, become more complex, but the impulse remains. We are makers. We transform our environment, not just by moving through it, but by actively modifying it, creating new possibilities, new niches, new ways of being. The hand and the mind, working together, guided by culture and transmitted through teaching, this is the engine of human innovation. It has carried us from simple stone flakes to smartphones, from fire-hardened spears to spacecraft. The distance seems vast, but each step followed logically from the last, each innovation built on previous knowledge, each generation teaching the next and adding something new. And it continues. We are still making, still innovating, still transforming raw material into functional object. The medium changes, electrons and photons replacing stone and wood, but the pattern persists. We extend ourselves through our creations, and in doing so, we change what it means to be human. But that, again, is a story for another time. For now, let us rest with the image of a hand, reaching out, grasping, shaping, making something that was not there before. A simple thing, perhaps, but in that simplicity lies the seed of everything that would come after. Fire changed everything. This is not hyperbole. Control of fire represents one of the most significant technological achievements in human evolution, perhaps the most significant. It extended the day beyond sunset. It provided warmth in cold climates. It transformed food, making nutrients more accessible. It created a gathering place, a hearth, a center around which social life could organize itself. The exact timing of fire control is uncertain. Evidence for fire use appears sporadically in the archaeological record, and it is often difficult to distinguish between natural fires and controlled ones. Burned bones and charred wood might be the result of a wildfire. Heated stones might be naturally occurring. The first clear evidence of regular fire use comes from sites around 500,000 years ago, though some researchers argue for earlier dates. By 300,000 years ago, fire use is common. Hearths appear at archaeological sites, structures of stones that contain the fire, direct the heat, protect it from wind. This is no longer opportunistic use of natural fire, but deliberate creation and maintenance. Someone in the group knows how to make fire, how to start it from friction or sparks, how to keep it alive through the night, how to transport embers to a new camp. The knowledge of fire-making is specialized. In most hunter-gatherer societies, not everyone can make fire. It is a skill that requires practice, understanding of materials, patience. Different methods exist: the hand drill, the bow drill, the fire plow, the use of flint and pyrite. Each method requires specific materials and specific techniques. And in wet conditions, or with poor materials, even an expert might struggle. Maintaining fire is often easier than creating it. A fire can be kept alive for weeks or months by adding fuel, by banking coals overnight, by careful attention. Many nomadic groups carried fire with them as they moved, protecting embers in special containers, treating them as precious resources. Losing the fire meant potential disaster, especially in cold climates or during wet seasons. What does fire provide? The obvious answer is heat and light, but the implications run deeper. Fire creates a bubble of safety in the darkness. Predators, most of them, fear fire. A campfire at night keeps lions and hyenas and wolves at a distance. This allows humans to sleep on the ground rather than in trees, to rest more deeply, to lower the energetic cost of vigilance. Fire cooks food. Raw meat is digestible, and many carnivores thrive on it. But cooking breaks down tough fibers, denatures proteins, kills parasites and bacteria. Cooked food yields more calories for less digestive effort. Starches, tubers, grains, many of these are indigestible or low in nutrition when raw, but become valuable food sources when cooked. This dietary shift may have enabled brain expansion. The human brain, as we have noted, is metabolically expensive. It requires a steady supply of glucose, quality nutrients, energy that must come from somewhere. Cooking provided a higher return on foraging effort, more calories and nutrients extracted from the same amount of food. This surplus could support larger brains, longer childhoods, more investment in learning and social complexity. Fire also shapes the landscape. Humans learned, very early, to use fire as a tool for environmental management. Controlled burns clear underbrush, promote the growth of certain plants. create habitat for game animals. Many ecosystems that appear natural are actually shaped by thousands of years of human fire management. The savannas of Africa, the grasslands of North America, the open forests of Australia, all bear the mark of deliberate burning. This is a form of environmental engineering, subtle but profound. It does not transform the landscape in the obvious way that agriculture does, but it changes species composition, nutrient cycling, the frequency and intensity of natural fires. Humans with fire were not merely adapting to their environment, they were modifying it, creating conditions favorable to their survival and flourishing. But perhaps the most significant effect of fire is social. Fire creates a center, a place where people gather. In the darkness, the circle of firelight defines the boundary of the social world. Beyond it is the unknown, the dangerous, the wild. Within it is warmth, safety, companionship. Around the fire, people talk. This seems trivial, but it is not. Language, human language, is an extraordinary phenomenon. All animals communicate, of course. Birds sing, wolves howl, bees dance. But human language is qualitatively different. It is open-ended, generative, capable of expressing an infinite number of ideas using a finite set of elements. We do not know when language evolved. Spoken words leave no fossils. The anatomy provides some clues. The position of the larynx, the structure of the hyoid bone, the neural architecture for motor control of speech. By 300,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans almost certainly had the physical capacity for speech similar to ours. Whether they used that capacity in the same way is another question. Some researchers argue that fully modern language, with complex syntax and large vocabularies, is relatively recent, perhaps emerging only 50 to 100,000 years ago, coinciding with the appearance of symbolic artifacts like shell beads and ochre engravings. Others argue that language is much older, that even Homo erectus had some form of linguistic communication, simple perhaps by our standards, but functional for coordinating activities and sharing knowledge. We may never know with certainty, but what is clear is that by the time Homo sapiens dispersed across the world, they had language in the full modern sense. And this language was not a neutral tool. It shaped thought, structured perception, enabled new forms of social organization and cultural transmission. Language allows for displacement, the ability to talk about things that are not immediately present. You can describe a hunting strategy for tomorrow, or recount an event from last week. You can tell stories about ancestors, about places far away, about things that might be, or things that never were. This liberates thought from the here and now, creates a mental space that extends across time and distance. Language enables cooperation at scale. You can coordinate with dozens or hundreds of people, not just through direct observation, but through verbal instruction and negotiation. You can plan, assign roles, establish rules and norms, create social structures more complex than those possible in non-linguistic species. And language transmits culture with high fidelity. Observational learning is powerful, but it has limits. You can watch someone nap a stone tool and learn the rough technique, but the subtle details, the corrections, the reasons for specific choices, these are best conveyed through explanation. With language, knowledge can be packaged, abstracted, transmitted intact across generations and populations. Around the fire, in the evening, when the day's work is done, people tell stories. This is universal, found in every human culture. Stories about hunts, about encounters with animals or other groups, about ancestors and spirits, and the nature of the world. These stories are not mere entertainment, though they entertain. They are repositories of knowledge, mnemonics for ecological and social information, frameworks for understanding cause and effect. A story about a hunter who ignored certain signs and was killed by a lion is a lesson in observation and caution. A story about ancestors who survived a drought by moving to a specific location is a map, a record of where water can be found in hard times. A story about the origin of fire or the creation of animals is a cosmology, a way of making sense of a world full of phenomena that demand explanation. These stories are oral traditions maintained through memory and repetition. In non-literate societies, memory is a trained skill. Individuals designated as keepers of tradition memorize vast amounts of information: genealogies, migration routes, plant and animal lore, ritual procedures. The accuracy can be remarkable. Aboriginal Australian songlines, oral maps encoded in song and story, contain information about landscapes and resources that has been transmitted for thousands of years. But oral tradition is also fluid. Stories change in the telling, adapted to context, elaborated or simplified depending on the audience. This flexibility is both a strength and a weakness. It allows culture to adapt, to respond to new circumstances, but it also makes it difficult to preserve information unchanged across many generations. Writing, when it emerges much later, changes this. It fixes language in a physical medium, allows for exact reproduction, enables communication across time and space without direct contact. But writing is not part of our evolutionary history. It is too recent, appearing only about 5,000 years ago. For most of human existence, language was spoken, ephemeral, tied to the moment of utterance. The fire and the word, then, are intertwined. The fire creates the occasion for speech, the gathering place where stories are told. And the stories, transmitted through language, carry the culture forward. Each generation learns from the previous one, not just through observation, but through explicit instruction, through narrative, through the accumulated wisdom encoded in words. This is why humans are so adaptable, why we can inhabit every environment from Arctic to equator. We do not rely solely on genetic adaptation, on the slow process of natural selection. We adapt culturally, learning from others, innovating, spreading innovations through language. A useful technique discovered by one person can spread through an entire population within a generation, can be refined and improved, can become part of the shared toolkit. The fire provides warmth, light, cooked food, protection. But it also provides something less tangible, a center, a focal point, a place where the group constitutes itself as a group. The people around the fire are not just individuals who happen to be in proximity. They are a community, bound by shared stories, shared knowledge, shared history. In modern life, we have lost some of this. We have electric lights that banish the darkness, central heating that regulates temperature, cooking appliances that remove us from the direct experience of fire. We communicate through screens, through text and images that flicker in isolation. The hearth, as a physical and social reality, has largely disappeared from our lives. But the impulse remains. We still gather, still tell stories, still use language to create and maintain social bonds. The medium has changed, but the underlying pattern persists. We are, fundamentally, a species that talks, that shares, that builds culture through communication. And fire, in its way, persists too, not as a necessity, but as a symbol, a connection to our past. People still gather around campfires when they go camping, still find comfort in the sight and sound and smell of burning wood. There is something primal in it, something that speaks to a part of us older than cities or agriculture or even language. Fire is one of the first technologies, one of the foundations of human existence. Imagine a night 50,000 years ago. A small group of people sits around a fire somewhere in Africa or Asia or Europe. The fire crackles, sends up sparks into the darkness. Beyond the circle of light, animals move, unseen but heard. The people talk, quietly, about the day's events, about plans for tomorrow, about stories they have heard and stories they remember. A child asks a question. An elder answers, explaining something about the world, about how things work or why things are the way they are. The explanation is passed on, becomes part of what the child knows, will someday teach to their own children. The culture persists, transmitted through language, maintained through this simple act of talking around a fire. This is the scene that has played out countless times across human history, in every environment, in every culture. The details vary, the languages differ, the stories are unique to each tradition, but the pattern is the same. People gather, they speak, they share what they know, and in doing so, they create and sustain the human world. The fire and the word, two technologies, one ancient and one perhaps even more ancient, that work together to make us who we are. Without fire, we are limited by cold and darkness, forced to eat raw food, vulnerable to predators. Without language, we are isolated individuals, unable to share knowledge or coordinate action or build complex societies. Together, they enable everything else. They are the foundation on which all subsequent human achievement rests. Every invention, every discovery, every work of art or literature or philosophy, all of it traces back, ultimately, to people sitting around fires, talking, sharing, building culture, word by word, generation by generation. And perhaps, on a quiet night, when you sit by a fire and listen to the voices of friends or family, you are participating in something very old, something that connects you to every human who has ever lived. The fire burns as it has always burned. The words flow as they have always flowed. And for a moment, the past and present merge, and you are part of an unbroken chain stretching back into the depths of time. There is a moment in human development, around 18 months of age, when a child recognizes themselves in a mirror. Before this, the reflection is treated as another child, something to interact with, but not as self. After this recognition, the child understands that the image is them, that they are both observer and observed, that they exist as an object in the world, as well as a subject experiencing it. This capacity for self-awareness, for reflexive consciousness, is rare in the animal kingdom. Some great apes display it, dolphins, elephants, magpies. But in humans, it reaches a depth and complexity unmatched elsewhere. We do not merely know that we exist. We contemplate our existence, question it, create elaborate theories about what it means to be a self. When did this capacity emerge in our evolutionary history? Like language, consciousness leaves no fossils. We cannot excavate a sense of self from the ground. But we can look for proxies, for behaviors that suggest inner awareness, for artifacts that seem to require a conception of self and other, of present and future, of a reality that extends beyond immediate sensation. Burial of the dead is one such marker. The earliest clear evidence of intentional burial comes from around 100,000 years ago, with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals both practicing it. Bodies are placed in graves, sometimes with objects, shells or stones or tools, sometimes with traces of ochre, a red pigment derived from iron oxide. The position of the body is often deliberate, curled in a fetal position or laid out straight, hands placed in specific ways. Why bury the dead? The practical answer is sanitation, removal of a decaying body from the living area. But the elaboration, the inclusion of grave goods, the care in positioning, these suggest something more. They suggest a belief that the dead person is going somewhere, that they will need or want these objects, that there is something beyond the cessation of biological function. This is not proof of religious belief in the modern sense. We cannot know what Paleolithic people thought about death, what conception they had of an afterlife or spirit world. But burial implies a cognitive capacity to imagine states of being different from the present, to project oneself or others into a future or alternate condition. It implies a theory of mind, an understanding that others have inner states, experiences, perhaps even persistence beyond death. Art is another marker. The first clear symbolic artifacts appear around 100,000 years ago. Shell beads with holes drilled through them, pieces of ochre with engraved patterns, simple geometric designs. By 40,000 years ago, there is an explosion of artistic production in Europe and elsewhere. Cave paintings, rock engravings, carved figurines, decorated tools and ornaments. The cave paintings are especially striking. Deep in limestone caverns, far from the entrance, where no natural light penetrates, ancient artists painted animals, horses, bison, aurochs, lions, mammoths. They used charcoal and ochre, created shading and perspective, captured movement and posture with remarkable skill. Some images are single animals, others are complex scenes, groups of figures interacting, overlapping, creating a sense of depth. The most famous sites are in France and Spain, Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira. But cave art is found across the world, in Australia, Africa, Asia, the Americas. The style and subject matter vary, but the impulse is universal. Humans, everywhere they went, felt compelled to make images, to represent the world or their inner experience in visual form. Why make art? This question has generated endless speculation. Perhaps the images had magical or ritual significance, attempts to influence the hunt or honor the animals. Perhaps they were teaching tools, ways of transmitting knowledge about animal behavior. Perhaps they were simply aesthetic, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful or meaningful, the desire to leave a mark, to say, "I was here." Or perhaps all of these things and more. Art is multivalent, capable of serving many purposes simultaneously. What is clear is that creating art requires a sophisticated mental life. You must be able to form mental images, to remember and imagine, to plan a composition, to have some conception of representation, of the idea that marks on a surface can stand for things in the world. Some of the cave paintings include human figures, though these are less common than animal depictions. When humans are shown, they are often abstract, stick figures or schematic forms. But there are exceptions. In some caves, there are handprints, stencils made by placing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it, leaving a negative image. These are profoundly moving, perhaps because they are so direct, so personal. A hand, someone's hand, pressed against stone 30,000 years ago. The hand says, "I was here." The hand says, "I exist." It is an assertion of presence, of individuality, of the self reaching across millennia to touch the future. When you look at those handprints, you are seeing the trace of a person, not just an abstraction, not just Paleolithic hunter-gatherer, but a specific individual who stood in that cave and made that mark. This sense of individuality, of unique selfhood, may seem obvious to us. We take it for granted that each person is a distinct individual with their own inner life, their own thoughts and feelings and memories. But this is a cultural construction as much as a biological given. Different societies conceive of the self differently, emphasize different aspects, draw different boundaries between self and other, individual and community. In Western philosophy, the self is often conceived as autonomous, bounded, separate from others. The individual is the fundamental unit, and society is an aggregate of individuals. In many non-Western cultures, the self is more relational, defined by connections to family, community, ancestors. The individual exists but is not primary. Identity is distributed across social networks. Both views are valid. Both reflect something true about human experience. We are individuals, and we are social beings. We have unique inner lives, and we are shaped by our relationships. The balance between these aspects varies across cultures and historical periods, but the underlying tension is universal. Self-awareness brings with it certain burdens. If you know you exist, you also know you will die. Humans are, as far as we know, the only animals that understand their own mortality, that can project forward in time and see the inevitable end. This knowledge shapes much of human culture, drives much of human anxiety and creativity. Religion, in many forms, can be seen as a response to mortality, an attempt to imagine continuity beyond death, to find meaning in the face of finitude. Art and storytelling serve similar functions, creating legacies, ways of persisting beyond the individual lifespan. Even our drive to reproduce, to pass on genes and culture to the next generation, can be understood partly as a response to the knowledge of our own impermanence. But self-awareness also enables extraordinary things. The ability to reflect on your own thoughts, to critique your own beliefs, to imagine alternative possibilities. This is the foundation of science, philosophy, ethics. You can ask not just what is, but what should be. You can evaluate actions, consider consequences, make moral judgments. Theory of mind, the understanding that others have minds like yours, but with different contents, is closely related to self-awareness. If you understand that you have beliefs and desires and intentions, you can attribute the same to others. You can imagine what they might be thinking or feeling, can predict their behavior, can cooperate or compete based on your model of their inner state. This capacity is fundamental to human sociality. We live in groups, often large groups, and navigate complex social hierarchies and relationships. We form alliances, detect cheaters, engage in reciprocal exchange, coordinate on shared goals. All of this requires theory of mind, the ability to read and respond to the mental states of others. Language and theory of mind co-evolve, reinforce each other. Language allows us to talk about mental states, to say, I think, or she believes, or they want. This makes our internal models more explicit, more shareable, subject to discussion and refinement. We can compare notes on what someone might be thinking, can collaboratively build an understanding of others that is more sophisticated than what any individual could achieve alone. But theory of mind also enables deception. If you can model what another person believes, you can manipulate those beliefs, can present false information, can strategically withhold truth. Humans are, not to put too fine a point on it, excellent liars. We engage in deception routinely, in contexts ranging from the trivial to the profound. And we have evolved counter-adaptations, skills at detecting deception, skepticism, demand for evidence. This creates an arms race of sorts, an evolutionary and cultural escalation between deception and detection. We become more sophisticated deceivers, which drives selection for better detection, which drives selection for more subtle deception, and so on. The result is a species with extraordinary social intelligence, capable of both profound cooperation and profound manipulation. Self-awareness also enables temporal extension of the self. We remember our past and plan for our future. We conceive of ourselves as continuous across time, the same person who existed years ago and who will exist years hence. This is not as obvious as it sounds. The cells in your body are mostly replaced every 7 to 10 years. Your memories change, your beliefs evolve, your physical appearance alters. In what sense are you the same person? Philosophers have debated this question for centuries, and there is no consensus answer. But psychologically, practically, we do maintain a sense of continuous identity. We hold ourselves accountable for past actions, make plans based on future goals, construct narratives that connect our present self to past and future versions. This narrative self, this story we tell about who we are, is a central feature of human consciousness. And it is fragile. Neurological damage, mental illness, extreme trauma, all of these can disrupt the sense of self, can create discontinuities or alterations that are deeply distressing. People with amnesia lose their autobiographical past, struggle to form new memories, exist in an eternal present. People with dissociative disorders may experience themselves as multiple selves, with gaps in memory and awareness between states. These conditions reveal how constructed, how dependent on proper neural function the self really is. But for most of us, most of the time, the self feels solid, unified, continuous. We wake up each morning as ourselves, carry forward our projects and relationships, maintain coherence across time and context. This is an achievement, a cognitive accomplishment, even if it feels effortless. When did this modern sense of self emerge? The archaeological record suggests a gradual process, not a sudden leap. Simple self-awareness, the ability to recognize oneself as distinct from the environment, probably evolved early, perhaps present in Homo erectus or even earlier. More sophisticated aspects, narrative self, temporal extension, full theory of mind, these may have emerged more recently, within the last 100,000 years, coinciding with the appearance of symbolic artifacts and complex social organization. Or perhaps they were present earlier, but simply did not leave traces we can recognize. Consciousness is invisible, in life and in the fossil record. We infer it from behavior, from artifacts, from the structure of the brain. But these inferences are always tentative, always subject to revision as new evidence emerges. What we can say with confidence is that by the time Homo sapiens dispersed across the world, they possessed a fully modern consciousness. They were self-aware in the deepest sense, capable of reflection, imagination, symbolic thought. They created art and ritual, told stories, contemplated their place in the world, wondered about death and meaning and the nature of existence. They were, in other words, recognizably human, not just in body, but in mind, not just in behavior, but in inner experience. If you could somehow meet a person from 50,000 years ago, educated in your language and culture, you would find them fully capable of understanding and engaging with modern life. Their brain is your brain. Their cognitive architecture is your cognitive architecture. This is both humbling and remarkable. Humbling because it means we are not the pinnacle of anything, not the end point of evolution, just one moment in an ongoing process. Remarkable because it means that all of human cultural achievement, from the first cave paintings to quantum mechanics, from the first stories to modern literature, has been accomplished with essentially the same biological equipment. We have not evolved significantly in the last 50,000 years, not in any way that matters for cognition or behavior. The changes are superficial: variation in skin color, lactose tolerance in some populations, minor adaptations to high altitude or diet. But the brain, the mind, the capacity for thought and creativity and self-awareness, this has remained stable. What has changed is culture, the accumulated knowledge and techniques and institutions that we inherit and modify and pass on. We are born into a world already shaped by countless previous generations, a world full of tools and languages and concepts that vastly extend what any individual could discover or invent alone. This is the human condition, then. We are self-aware beings, conscious of our own existence, capable of reflecting on our thoughts, imagining alternatives, contemplating meaning and mortality. We are social beings, embedded in networks of relationships, dependent on others for survival and flourishing, shaped by culture as much as by genes. We are creative beings, makers of tools and art and stories, transformers of our environment, builders of worlds both material and symbolic. And we are mortal beings, limited in time, aware of our own finitude, driven by that awareness to create and connect and leave some trace of our passing. The mirror of self reflects all of this back to us. When we look at ourselves, we see not just a face or body, but a story, a history, a set of relationships and experiences that define who we are. We see the person we were, the person we might become, the choices we have made, and the possibilities still open to us. And perhaps, when we look deeply enough, we see something more. We see the long chain of ancestors stretching back into the depths of time, the millions of years of evolution that shaped us, the countless individuals who lived and loved and struggled and passed on their genes and culture to the next generation. We are the beneficiaries of all that effort, all that survival, all that accumulated wisdom. We are also the inheritors of all that violence, all that suffering, all the extinction and loss that marks the evolutionary path. The human story is not a tale of inevitable progress or unfolding purpose. It is a story of contingency and chance, of survival and adaptation, of branches that flourished and branches that ended. We are here because our ancestors happened to survive, happened to be in the right place at the right time, happened to have the traits that allowed them to persist when others did not. There is no grand design, no predetermined destination. We are the product of a blind process, natural selection, operating over unimaginable stretches of time. And yet, we have emerged with the capacity to understand that process, to trace our own origins, to study the mechanisms that created us. We have become, in a sense, evolution aware of itself. We can look back at the path we traveled and forward to the possibilities that lie ahead. We can make choices, not just as individuals, but as a species, about what we want to become. This is perhaps the deepest meaning of the mirror of self. We are not just passive products of evolution. We are active participants, capable of shaping our own future, of choosing how to live, what to value, what legacy to leave. The story of human evolution is not over. It continues, in every moment, with every choice we make. And so we stand here, at this particular moment in time, looking back at the long path that brought us here, and forward into an unknown future. We are the descendants of ancient wanderers, toolmakers, firekeepers, storytellers. We are the inheritors of millions of years of adaptation and survival. We are, for better and worse, what 4 billion years of life on Earth has produced. The mirror shows us a face, human and familiar, shaped by evolution and culture, unique and yet connected to every other human who has ever lived. And in that reflection, we see not just ourselves, but our species, our history, our potential, our responsibility to the past and to the future. The story of human evolution is the story of how we became who we are, but it is also the story of who we might become, the possibilities that lie ahead, the choices we have yet to make. And that story is still being written, with every breath, every action, every moment of consciousness and choice. So let us rest now with that image, a face in a mirror looking back at itself, seeing the long path of evolution, feeling the weight of history and the lightness of possibility. We are awake to ourselves, aware of our own existence, and in that awareness lies both burden and gift, the knowledge of mortality and the capacity for meaning, the isolation of individual consciousness and the connection to all of life. We are human, we are here, and for this moment, That is enough.